Welcome to Unstuck TV, where we bring guests on who have had great experiences of overcoming adversity, and they're here to share their experiences with you. My co-host today is Cheryl Green, and we are bringing our guest, the fabulous Eddie Garcia. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you, John. Thank you guys for having me here today.
So we met Eddie a few years ago at a National Speakers Association event, and Eddie was one of our first speakers at our very first Unstuck conference, and he has an amazing story to tell in just a few minutes. But first, Cheryl, catch us up to speed. What's going on in your Unstuck world?
My Unstuck world? Well, I added wedding officiant to my list of skills, and I actually married 2 Chihuahuas a couple of weeks ago for a fundraiser for the animal rescue. So yeah, I always feel like leading with that because, Chihuahua wedding, whatever. Anyway, but spoke at a conference on Saturday, and it just feels really good to know when you're helping people and you're touching on something that's going on in their lives at that moment.
Tell us a little bit about that experience Saturday.
Saturday, well, you know what? I have to caution audiences. I'm gonna throw this out there. A lot of people have very, we'll say stoic expressions, just very flat expressions. And when you're a speaker and you look out on an audience of super flat expressions, you don't know how you're doing. And it's a little upsetting. So I was actually kind of concerned while I was giving this speech, but afterwards, a lot of people came up and said, how they were going through similar things and how my story had really moved them. So, you know what? When you're in the audience, look moved.
Yeah. People don't realize how big that is.
It is.
One of my first speeches, there were 35, 40 people in the room. And I got up, I'm feeling great, and there is a woman dead center of the room, and she's like this, is sleeping. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, she hates this. I've got to pick it up. I got to get more energy. I've got to be more dynamic. So I'm throwing things all over the place. I'm doing my song and dance, trying to get this one person's attention. Because I'm thinking, if she's that bored, I must be that bad. And so I'm going at it, doing my thing, and she looks up a few times and then just kind of off again. And so I'm feeling horrible about the whole speech, right? Now there's 30 some other people in the room that are loving it.
Yeah.
But that one person that doesn't look like they're loving it just totally threw me off to the point where I had to stop and literally pray in my head to help give me the strength to get through the speech.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you know that it's over, the room's emptying out, and she's the last person to leave. And she comes up to me and tells me how wonderful it was and how moved she was. I'm thinking, you were asleep the whole time.
She was moved.
And it turned out she had a medical condition where she was like narcolepsy or something, where she wasn't really asleep. She heard the whole thing and she loved it. But her expression completely threw me off. Yeah. So I can relate to that. It's
a challenge, but with those people after, and like she said to you, sometimes you can't tell if you're actually moving an audience.
But that's what we're there for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what makes it. And so you don't realize, you think all the times that the motivational speaker is there to motivate the whole audience, but you don't realize we feed off of the audience just as much as they get off of us. So, speaking of feeding off of the audiences, Eddie, tell us how you've been. What have you been up to?
You know what? I've been doing my thing. I mean, before I got sick, I was a teacher, coach. And even now, after having lost my hands and feet, it's the biggest part of our life. And we continue, me and my wife, because I always say that she's the best assistant coach a man can have, because she actually has to be my hands now. Yeah. And she loads the truck. And right now she's battling a little bit of a bad back, I was telling you earlier. And that's because she's always loading and unloading. It's the stuff that people don't see behind the scenes. And I think that's what's helped me get to my unstuck moment, because I have such a great wife and I have such a great family, a great support system that is just continuing to help me still live a wonderful life, just like I was living before. And I mean, it's just amazing.
So Eddie is one of the most inspirational people I have ever known. Truly blessed to be able to say he's a friend. But he has been on my mind the last couple of months a lot more than I ever wanted him to be. And no offense, but so stupidest thing, but 2 months ago I got bit by a spider or something. You still don't know what happened. And I got an infection in my leg, and it wasn't going away. So I end up in the hospital with an allergic reaction and all this other stuff. And 7 weeks later, it's not going away. And so I'm in the doctor's office, and the doctor looks at me and he goes, well, we all know the stories that somebody who knew somebody who had an infection and ended up losing a limb, but those are just old wives' tales. That never really happens. It's always somebody that knew somebody else. And I'm thinking, I know somebody.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, direct contact.
And so through that whole time, it was like scary, but only scary because I couldn't figure out what was wrong and fix it. So I'm finally on the upswing from that. But the whole time I'm thinking, obviously totally not the same situation by any means, but just to think the strength that this guy had to make it through just an amazing time. And how blessed it is to see you still doing the things that you love to do. So with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, I was actually administrator for the Clark County School District, and I thought I had the flu one day. I'm supervising lunch, and I rarely, if ever, go home. And the way I was feeling, I was getting incrementally sicker, and I'm talking about like by the minute. And before I knew it, I just finally had to ask for, I've got to go home, and so I told my supervisor, and they says, go home, and if you don't feel well tomorrow, don't come back. And we'll figure it out later. Well, sure enough, I went home, and I literally passed out. And I didn't know why, didn't understand. I just thought I had the flu, fell asleep, and didn't really wake up until the next day. And when I woke up the next day, I knew something was terribly wrong. And my wife was at work, and I eventually had to text her, tell her, you got to get me to the hospital now. Yeah. And then when she got me to we went to one of those like urgent care clinics first. And when I got there, I passed out again, and I'm being revived by nurses who they then did emergency blood work. They found out I was in renal failure, kidney failure, and I was being admitted into the hospital immediately, and they didn't know why. And it took about 3 days to figure out that I had contracted a flesh-eating bacteria in my thigh, and the bacteria got into my blood. It became septic, and basically they said, the standard is, you have a 20% chance of survival from after contracting, flesh-eating bacteria, and if you do survive it, chances are you're going to lose limbs. Well, after speaking with some of the nurses, they were telling me that most patients have a drip of IV in their IVs and stuff like that. When they see about 4 drips, they already automatically assume the worst. They think, he's not going to make it. I was beyond 4 drips a minute, which, there's almost 0% chance of survival. And the great thing about it is, the whole story, I survived after 3 surgeries to try to remove it when I wasn't supposed to survive 1. And, I'm here to tell my story. The only casualty was I lost my hands and feet. But, if I want to look at the bad side and about losing my hands and feet instead of the good, that I'm still here today, being able to do the stuff that I'm still doing, my wife, my children, all that stuff. You know what? If you were to tell me, death or lose your hands and feet, I know it kind of sounds, maybe morbid or what have you, but I would lose my hands and feet over anything else that could happen to me, just so I could be with my children and my wife.
Such an awesome story, and there's so much more of that to share. So I want to get into a whole bunch of stuff. Cheryl, do you have any? Because what I want to talk about, we're going to talk about after break. So.
I actually, the executive director of the rescue that I work with, she's a quadriplegic. And it really resonated with me what you said about your wife being your hands, basically, because she works her butt off to save animals, but she does so using her voice. And, she has to have somebody with her at all times, and she gives directions better than any of us ever could. That support system and that realizing that, they're important, but having somebody there that can serve as that for you is...
So what makes Eddie's story so great isn't what happened to him, it's what he's done with it since, and we're going to talk about that when we come back from this break.
Sounds good.